Good evening, everybody. So we got a pretty long stream here tonight. Initially, this slideshow was, excuse me, one second. Initially, this slideshow was 18 slides. I've narrowed it down to like 7 or 8 because I felt like that there was way too much information in it for what we're going to talk about, because there's a lot of variables with the defensive pairs this year with the new players and everything like that. So that's one thing that I wanted to just go ahead and put out there from the beginning. Secondly, I'm going to do a couple of monologues about a couple other things. Then we'll get into the defensive pairing slides. Then we're going to take a short break. And then after that, I'm going to talk about 3 individual players that are talked about tonight, in that of Sean Walker, Alexander Nikishin, and Keandre Miller, and why I think that there's a little bit more to discuss with their specific roles. Whereas when it comes to Slavin, Gostisbehere, and let's see. When it comes to Slavin and Gostisbehere, pretty clearly defined. Jalen Chatfield, pretty clearly defined. So I'll do a short discussion on all 3 of them that I have written notes for after we take that break. So first thing here, I'm going to have to pull this up from one of the old slides. Just wanted to put the Don't Sue Me slide up there. Additionally, even though he's not listed on here, some of the photos used in these slides are something I want to credit to Walt Ruff. I took them from him posting them on X. Really good pictures of Chatfield, Miller, and Nikishin in particular. So I would like to thank him for that and his continued great coverage of the Carolina Hurricanes. So wanted to throw that out there in advance. And now we're going to go ahead and get to the defensive pairing slides from here. So now one thing I'm going to ask of you, the audience, with every single pair, and there's 4, or with every single configuration, and there's 4 of them that I've concocted here, that I'm going to show you guys, express how I think that they'll work, how effective they'll be, so on and so forth. I want you, the audience, to stay with me on that topic, and I will open it up to a discussion after talking about all 4 of these particular configurations. We'll do the same thing when we're talking about the 3 defensemen I want to talk about at the end. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So first thing to note here, unpredictability here this season for a multitude of reasons. You have 3 new players, Nikishin, Miller. Excuse me. Give me one second. So you have 2 new players, excuse me, Nikishin and Miller. You have known individual quantities in that of Slavin, Chatfield, Walker, and Gostisbehere, even though you know the quantity that is Sean Walker, and he's going to be talked about extensively in this. It's looking like he could potentially take on an increased role, so that's something that we definitely want to keep an eye on and everything like that. So known pair quantities, we're going to talk about this. I believe it's on the next slide because I made these like a week ago. I just spent the last couple of days trimming them down. Slavin and Walker, you don't have a huge sample size, but you have enough to know that that pair can be effective and potentially the best one that we've seen in the Rod Brindamore era. Gostisbehere and Walker spent all season playing together last season. They were very effective, had a very, very high expected goals, and were very dynamic, particularly in the offensive zone, retaining the offensive zone and helping to generate chances while down there. Slavin is the cornerstone. It's the top pair left-handed defenseman. We already know this. It's the only 100% known quantity right now. And that includes if he ends up, for whatever reason, playing on the right side of the ice. So when I go into each of these configurations, I'll talk about little variables with them, and that'll be expounded upon more later. Uncertainty with many situations. Miller and Nikishin in particular, where do they fit? The key thing right here, in the past, for the last several seasons, you've kind of already known what the defensive pairs were going to look like. Even after the big off season last year with all the turnover and all the changes and everything, you knew that Slavin and Burns were going to play together. You knew that Miller and Orlov were going to slide up into that second pair, and that Gostisbehere and Walker would likely make up the third pair that had a specific role. Sorry, sparkling water, that had a specific role to make good on all the offensive zone draws that the Hurricanes have based on how aggressive their forecheck is and how good they are at possessing the puck and retaining the offensive zone. So one of the big keys here for this season, be patient. This is not going to get figured out immediately. The solution, however, for it, I believe, is inevitable. You have the right pieces. You just need to find the right fits. It's a puzzle. All the pieces fit. You just have to find out which one goes where. Right now, your only truly known quantity is that Slavin is your number one shutdown guy. Everything else from there is a little bit of a variable. So going into the next thing here, known quantities. Slavin Walker, Gostisbehere Walker, and Gostisbehere Chatfield, as we talked about before. Slavin and Walker, they logged a decent amount of minutes in the playoffs. So right here, this is a combination of the regular season and the playoff minutes and all these averages across the board with the goals percentage, expected goals percentage, Fenwick and Corsi percentages. Those are between the playoffs and the regular season for all these pairings. In the case of Gostisbehere and Chatfield, I didn't bother sampling the little bit they played together last season. That's more so a focus on the 22-23 season. So Slavin and Walker, they played 123.9 minutes together. They had a 71.45 goals for percentage. A lot of that is skewed by the playoffs. It would not be that high if they played together full time. I still think it would be above 60. Expected goals for percentage, that's more of a realistic number for them, 63.4. Fenwick 4, 65.25. Corsi 4, I don't know why that says 129.25, but that was around 60 as well. I probably did something wrong when I was copying and pasting some stuff in there. So then you go on to Gostisbehere and Walker. These guys are the biggest known quantity on the board here. They played basically the entire season and the playoffs together last year, a total of 915.8 minutes. 37.9 goals for percentage. Part of that is because of they had a little bit of a rough go in the playoffs, especially in the Florida series in the ECF. Goals for percentage 37.9. So that's why that is kind of low. If you keep that pair together, it's probably not going to be that low. It'll probably be a little bit above 50 at least. Just Florida really tanked their numbers because of how badly they really just ruined the Hurricanes in the ECF, especially over the course of games 1 through 3. Expected goals for percentage 61.1. Fenwick 60.95 and Corsi of 64.4. Those are realistic numbers for those guys to maintain. Now you go on to Gostisbehere and Chatfield. Again, these numbers are from the 22-23 season, regular season, and playoffs. Keep in mind, Gostisbehere was acquired at the deadline, so they didn't play a ton together in the regular season, but they stayed together throughout the playoffs. 421.2 minutes, 51.3 goals for percentage, expected goals for percentage of 61.6. Fenwick 4 percentage of 60.8, Corsi 4 percentage of 60.3. Now, all those right there are combinations that we could potentially see in some capacity or another next season. Slavin and Walker looks pretty likely based on what we've seen throughout camp, throughout the preseason, and everything like that. Gostisbehere and Walker, you have a known quantity there. You could see that the entirety of next season. That's a distinct possibility. Gostisbehere Chatfield, slightly removed yet known quantity that you could see next year, depending on how Rod decides to configure the defensive pairs. And like I said, this will get figured out. It won't get figured. Rome wasn't built in a day. It won't get figured out in the first game. But over the course of time, they're probably going to do some trial and error stuff with these defensive pairs, kind of figure out what works best, shuffle it around. And 20 games into the season, I think you'll see something solid. You may see a change or two between then and game 82 before the playoffs. But for the most part, this is going to get figured out, but be patient with it. It's going to take some time. Now, unlikely pairings, Slavin Chatfield. The reason why that, and this is not a slight on either one of them, I really like these guys, especially Slavin. That's too many defensive eggs in one basket. And it kind of like ripples down throughout the lineup. And then you've got too many of your offensive eggs in the other baskets of the other two pairs, if that makes sense. Slavin needs an offensively minded player to his right to maximize his net positives. We've seen this in the past. Slavin playing with Burns, D'Angelo, Hamilton, a little bit with Ethan Bear. Jacob Slavin is most effective when he has someone who will get up ice quickly. Not saying that Walker can't do that, but I'll get to my rationale on that. He needs someone who is offensively minded with him to maximize his capability. Jacob Slavin on his own typically has the capability of 1.5 to 2 shutdown guys on his own. So the best way to utilize him and make sure that he is not wasted is to make sure that he has a more offensively minded right-handed defenseman, or at least right side defenseman, or at least a two-way, more offensively minded guy to his right to maximize his capability. That's more often that the guy to his right is pinching. That's less often that the guy to his right, or that's less often he's having to defend 2-on-1s, because the person on his right has that confidence to make those aggressive pinches, to join the rush when they're on the breakout, all that type of stuff. So that's one thing. Walker Chatfield, I highly, highly doubt. I would say it's next to a 0% chance we see this pairing. Principal reason being both right-handed defensemen on the same pair. When you only have 2 right-handed defensemen, would put left-handed defensemen all throughout the lineup, or throughout the other 2 pairs in the lineup. So at that point, you would have 2 lefties on a pair, 2 lefties on another pair, 2 righties on another pair. That's just not going to work, not with as quickly as the Hurricanes like to move the puck up ice and how aggressive that they can be with their transition game. Miller and Nikishin, two new players on the same pair. This is unlikely, not as unlikely as the first two mentioned, but this is also unlikely just because they're both new to the system. In some ways, they have a similar game. You might be putting too many of your offensive eggs in one basket because both those guys have high shot velocities. They can throw hits. And even though they can defend, they both lean a little bit more towards the offensive side, in my opinion. So you definitely don't want them together, especially when Nikishin is new. Miller is new. Miller also didn't even get to make it into a preseason game since he was in the non-contact sweater the entire time. And both those guys, to play their best, need safety valves. So we're going to go on to configuration 1 through 2, 3, and 4 here, and I'm going to show you guys what I got here and why. So these are a little bit out of order based on what they were in the slides, I believe. But basically, configuration 1, we've kind of seen this in the preseason for the most part when they've been doing morning skates and practices at camp and everything like that. Jacob Slavin and Sean Walker for the top pair, Keandre Miller and Jalen Chatfield for the second pair, Alexander Nikishin and Shane Gostisbehere for the third pair. I'm a little bit worried about that one. I'll get into that. Configuration 2, you have, this is actually, I believe, should be configuration 4. I don't exactly remember, but Jacob Slavin, Shane Gostisbehere, I'll go into my rationale about why I think that could be a good pair. Keandre Miller, Jalen Chatfield. I want those two guys to play together because I think that you could see the second coming of Shea Pesci and even maybe a little bit better with those two guys. And then for the third pair on that particular configuration, you have Alexander Nikishin and Sean Walker. For configuration 3, Jacob Slavin and Keandre Miller. This one is unlikely, but we'll talk about it a little bit. Shane Gostisbehere, Jalen Chatfield, Alexander Nikishin, Sean Walker for configuration 3. Now for configuration 4, you have Jacob Slavin and Alexander Nikishin, Shane Gostisbehere and Sean Walker for the second pair, Keandre Miller and Jalen Chatfield for the third pair. So we'll talk about all these. There are more possibilities than just this, but I just had the 3 that I ruled out and 4 that I think are possible, because if I left everything in here that was in this slideshow originally, it was going to be a 3-hour stream, and I don't think any of us wanted to sit through hearing me talk for 3 hours. Hell, I don't like hearing me talk for 3 hours, but talking is about the only way that I have to convey all this stuff. Now, configuration 1. This is the one that we've seen predominantly throughout camp. Slavin, Walker, Miller, Chatfield, Nikishin, Gostisbehere. All right, so Walker could be the most dynamic partner Slavin has ever had, yet being a two-way defenseman, vice an offensive one. I will go into more detail about that when I talk about Sean Walker on an individual basis after the break. So one of the other good things about this pair, depending on how they run the power play, these two guys can be the bump-up shift, the first two guys that go on the ice after the power play expires for the Hurricanes. And then you can keep a good flow of the defense there, right? And just like that. Pros, dynamic top pair. Sean Walker has an offensive upside that we haven't really seen yet because he took that role of being the safety valve for Shane Gostisbehere last year. If you put him in a situation where he's with Jacob Slavin, that's going to be more zone exits, more joining the rush, more shots on net, more passes to create high danger chances in the offensive zone, because he knows that he's got the best shutdown guy in the game to his left to cover for him when he makes those aggressive maneuvers. So that's another thing to consider. That penalty kill top 4 is good. Those 4 right there could be really effective together as far as the 2 pairs that you would primarily utilize on the penalty kill. You have a decent amount of shutdown and scoring with this. Walker, great defensively. Slavin, the best defensively. And like I said, Walker's got that offensive upside that we just haven't really seen get tapped into yet and go to for game critical situations. You need a goal, but you're only down by 1. Don't want to take the chance of making it worse. 5 minutes left in the third period. That's a pair that's going to be out there for probably 3-4 shifts, totaling about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, maybe 3 minutes before you go to that situation where you have to pull the goalie somewhere around the minute 30 mark. So they're going to be out there a lot for something like that. Now, when you go into cons, you have 2 left-handed D on a pair without Jacob Slavin. If you have to have 2 left-handed defensemen playing together, probably one of their best effectiveness is to have, or one of their ways to be best effective is to have Jacob Slavin on that pair because of how capable he is defensively. So the guy to his right, being a left-handed shot who might have a little bit of harder time keeping pucks in the offensive zone, might have a harder time stopping people from getting to the middle of the ice when he's defending in his own zone. You've got Jacob Slavin there. That mitigates a lot of that. But if Slavin's playing with Walker, you can't have that. Will require shuffling if Walker is on power play 2. Sean Walker has done a few reps on power play 2, so that could also be a factor. You put 2 of the 3 best defenders in one pair. Right now, if you ask me, the 3 best defensemen the Hurricanes have in terms of defensemen in this order are Jacob Slavin, Jalen Chatfield, and Sean Walker. You're putting 2 of those 3 guys on the same pair. So that could dilute the other 2 pairs a little bit, something to keep an eye on. Nikishin Gostisbehere questions for the third pair. I'm a little bit worried about that. We'll see how it goes, but I'm just a little about it myself. So overall assessment, small sample size indicated Slavin and Walker could be a great pair together. We talked about that, the numbers in the second slide. They could be the go-to pair 5-on-5. They'll be your top penalty killing unit. Game critical situations as stated. Chatfield, Miller seem to have chemistry early. Nikishin and Gostisbehere will need time. Now, like I said, and I'm going to go into more detail about Keandre Miller and Jalen Chatfield, but like I said, this could be the second coming of the Shea and Pesci pairing. It really could, and it could be even better. So I would like to hear if any of you in the chat have thoughts in particular on configuration 1. I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to express that. I'll answer some questions and go into further details about it if you want me to, all that type of stuff. In the meantime, I will get to the comments that have already been made. 1, we have Sound the Siren. Carolina Hurricanes Fancast reposted the stream. Thank you very much, brother. I appreciate it so much. J-Dub, what up? Good to see you, pal. Dylan says, I know everyone wanted to win, but hard to judge when it was our fault starting lineup out there after a few games together to build the chemistry. Yeah, I didn't watch the game today. Funny story about that. I'll get to that in a little bit, but I'm going to see if anybody has anything to say about this particular configuration. We'll give it about a minute, and then we'll move on to the next one. And me personally, I'm not concerned about losing preseason games, and I'm so happy it's only going to be 4 preseason games next season because, man, they're a snooze fest, dude. They're just not fun to watch at all. But I just didn't watch it today. All right. So nothing else in here at the moment. All right. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next one. If necessary, we'll go back and look at it again. All right. Configuration 2. Jacob Slavin and Shane Gostisbehere for the top pair, Keandre Miller and Jalen Chatfield for the second pair, Alexander Nikishin and Sean Walker for the third pair. Third pair may be both on power play 2. That creates familiarization and fluidity. What I mean by that is that gives Slavin and whoever else the chance to go out immediately after the conclusion of a power play, and then you've got at least 1 shift or 2 before you go back to your third pair because they were just out there for the power play. Help split the minutes up a little bit more evenly on the back end. Keeps Miller and Chatfield together. This lineup could produce high net positives, and one of the reasons why this lineup could produce high net positives is you have the offense spread out pretty evenly. Gostisbehere on 1 pair, Miller on the second, Nikishin on the third, and then Walker, he can chip in some offense as well. Gostisbehere is going to be the primary offensive factor in the first pair in the event that the Canes decide to go that route. So, pros, top pair would produce 5-on-5. With Slavin and Gostisbehere, or let me look at the overall assessment first for this one. And then I will talk a little bit more about that top pair in particular. This would create a Slavin and TDA dynamic on the top pair. Gostisbehere and D'Angelo are pretty similar players. Difference is Ghost I would quantify as more of a offensively minded 2-way defenseman. He plays passable defense, produces plenty of offense, but D'Angelo was more of like a pure fourth forward. Gostisbehere is a little bit different of a player in that regard, but if he's playing with Slavin, he'll have a similar dynamic where he can really open up that offensive side of his game and play a zero hesitation game, and everything could work out really well there. This leaves the other 2 pairs balanced with left-handed defensemen, right-handed defensemen on each pair, so that'll balance those out. So going into the particular pros about this, top pair would produce 5-on-5. I think that pair would be great 5-on-5. Gostisbehere potentially could have 55, 60 points playing with Slavin if they were to stay together the entire season. Potential highest net positive throughout the entire lineup. Nikishin would have a good right-handed defensive partner, whether that be Sean Walker or Jalen Chatfield. I would rather it be Walker in this particular situation because I think Miller and Chatfield are going to work really well together. Defensive abilities even as possible. And I would say that that's throughout this entire lineup. You have 2 guys, or you have 1 offensively minded guy, 1 shutdown guy on each pair. So with the exception of the third pair, Walker's got a little bit more of a 2-way game to him, but we saw last year he can play that shutdown safety valve type of role. So cons, requires the power play and the penalty kill to do some shuffling. So special teams, you'd have to have bump up shifts with, makeshift pairs after power plays and penalty kills, because they're not going to put Ghost out there as a go-to for the penalty kill, especially not with everybody who's ahead of him. No known quantities. None of these guys have played together before. Whereas in the last slide and in the other ones we're going to talk about, you have known quantities. This would be 3 completely new pairs. Potential lowest net positive, even though that you have the offense spread out pretty evenly, it would still potentially not produce a high net positive on any pair as an individual, and you might just be marginally above in the goals for percentage, the expected goals for percentage, and everything like that. I'm not worried about them not producing shots in any of these configurations. That's not going to be a problem. But as far as creating quality chances and actually scoring goals, this might yield you the lowest net positive, this particular configuration. You would get a little bit bigger of a bump out of a Slavin and Gostisbehere pairing in theory, but it might not exactly go down that way. So this is also more of an overall shutdown configuration as well. So defensively, I think that this would be very, very, very sound. So it all just depends on what they decide the priorities are for the defensemen as they configure them, if they do it this way. So I'll do some more comments here, and then we'll go to configuration 3. Smokey, what's up? Preseason glorified practice. Yeah, I just wasn't interested in watching today. I really wasn't, because it's like I knew it was going to be a pillow fight. Dress rehearsal before game 1 for both those guys. No, they weren't gonna play hard. AB reposted the stream. Thank you. Caniac Sessions reposted the stream. Thanks, bud. Cusco says, was at the game tonight kind of boring, huh? Yeah, from I heard that from multiple people that it was just kind of a snore fest, but I knew it was going to be a pillow fight. There's no point. There were no points on the line. There were some guys playing for jobs. I heard that Svechnikov got laid out near the end, and that Aho apparently tried to fight somebody, but I wasn't interested in watching it today. I ate I had my weekly burgers, because I only eat burgers once a week now, and I watched some college football, and then I finally watched the Inside the NHL episode with Seth Jarvis, and I have a little bit of a monologue that I'm going to do about that before or after the break. I haven't decided which one. Raleigh 98, what's up, buddy? Sorry I didn't get back to your comment on YouTube. I've been kind of busy lately. Appreciate all the visuals. Thank you. Think it comes down to which D you want with Slavin and how much exposure you want Nikishin to get. Yes. That's one of the big overall factors with this, because the defense is built around Slavin. So whoever you put with Slavin, there's a domino effect from there of how you line up the rest of the pairs, because you'll notice throughout all these, Jacob Slavin is the only guy that's in the same spot in all of them. Dylan Bollinger says, ain't Nikishin and Miller the same age, and Legault as young Badinka, et cetera, are D for years to come, looks to be getting even bigger. Yeah, and one thing I forgot in the first slide, I did put on the depth chart here, but I just didn't really feel like it was super relevant to discuss, because I don't think we're going to see any of these guys minus injuries. Mike Riley, veteran, 7th defenseman. Charles Alexis Legault, this guy, if there was room for him, he might have made the jump now. He really is that good. Dominic Badinka, 2-way right-handed defenseman. He's at least a year out still. Dominic Fensori is not going to be a mainstay NHL player, which I hate, because that kid, his skating is unbelievable. I actually sent his dad follows me on X, and I sent him a message. I said, your son has some of the best skating I've ever seen. Like, I mean that wholeheartedly. That kid, his skating is incredible. Whenever he's done playing, if he taught people how to skate, if he was a skating instructor, an advanced one, he would be remarkably good at that. Like, his skating is ridiculously incredible. All right, so let's go back here. Bless and deliver. What's up, buddy? I agree with having Chatfield and Miller on the same line. Additionally, I think the potential of benefits of Slavin and Walker line outweigh the potential negatives. I believe so too. The only problem with that is that leaves you unable to avoid a Nikishin and Gostisbehere pair. And I have my concerns about that particular pair, but the top 4 would be remarkable. But somewhere you have to dilute the lineup in some way or another with having 4 left-handed shots and 2 right. It just depends on what they decide to do with it. Like I said, that it will get figured out. Just don't expect it to get figured out within the first 20 games. And however the defensive pairs start out of when the season starts, not expecting them to end that way. Cavery reposted the stream. Thank you, buddy. Raleigh 98. Also, how many points can Sean Walker get with if he's with Slavin? So I'm going to talk about Walker more on an individual basis after we're done with the defensive configurations. I'm going to take a short break after that's all done. Short version, conservatively estimating 40, 45. If he really pops off, 60. But if I had to guess, that would be more at the lower end of 40 to 45. But he's ready to take on that role. He really is. If they decide to configure the pairs that way. Like I said, the only downside of that is what it does to the rest of the lineup as far as diluting it a little bit. All right, configuration 3. This one is very unlikely. This is one I only think you'll see if things are just kind of not going well and they're trying to, throw some pasta at the wall and see what sticks. Jacob Slavin and Keandre Miller, Shane Gostisbehere, Jalen Chatfield, Alexander Nikishin, Sean Walker. Again, put Slavin with an left-handed to another one of the left-handed defensemen. You can balance out the rest of the lineup. Puts both power play 2 defensemen together 5-on-5 and allows for fluidity in the pairs as we talked about with one of the other pairs. Pros, second pair is a known quantity. You already know Gostisbehere and Chatfield can play together. We saw that a couple of seasons ago. And Chatfield's only gotten better. Gostisbehere is, he's kind of the same player then that he was now. I would say a little bit better, honestly, because now he's had a full season and a full camp and an additional full camp to adapt to the game and learn a little bit more and become much more embedded with the way that the Hurricanes play. So that's something to be considered there. Adds a presence to the top pair. Keandre Miller, I don't know why all these Rangers fans are going around saying that he's soft. The guy's already recorded 652 hits and he's 25 years old. So I ain't going to hear none of that. The kid will throw hits. And now he's got better coaches than what he had before. And Miller is another guy I'm going to talk about on an individual basis because what he needs to work on is a very, very short and uncomplicated list before he turns into an impact player for the team. Balances out the bottom 4 because you'll have 2 right-handed, 2 left-handed defensemen spread evenly over the other 2 pairs. Cons, Miller on right defense, that's an unknown quantity. One of the reasons I would want to put him over there is not all too dissimilar to what you're going to see with Nikishin in the next slide. That really heavy shot being in the one-timer spot a whole lot, that could be a great thing. You only have one known quantity, and that's Gostisbehere and Chatfield. Possible lower offense, kind of like the same reasons I stated on the previous configuration, and it may be the lowest net positives overall, as I talked about on the previous one of the previous ones as well. When you go for a really even configuration like this, you might lose some of the net positives. But to balance the lineup, it's kind of a give or take thing. Something somewhere's got to be sacrificed. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So it just depends on how they decide to go about it. When you go to configuration 4, this is one I want to highlight. You will not see this out of camp. But I think that this is going to be the pairs come playoff time, provided Nikishin develops properly. That's the big thing for this. It depends on his progress. If he makes enough progress between now and, say, game 70, and they can get spun up in the last 12 games of the season, then I think that you maybe see this when going in to the postseason. I personally would like to see this configuration. Not yet. Give it 60 to 70 games, and maybe you see this. You can't do it out of camp. But I would like to see this one personally. So second pair gives high amounts of possession and the potential to drive offense by blue liners as a whole, because you already know that that's a known quantity from Gostisbehere and Walker. And then lastly, you still have Miller and Chatfield together. So pros, Nikishin, possibly right-handed defenseman capable. We saw him play that in the KHL. He did it in the Olympics, even though NHL players weren't there when they went to Beijing, which is in China. And he was on that pair there. For someone like him, it's not so difficult for him to play the offside because he doesn't use his stick as much to defend as he does his shoulder. The second pair is a known quantity. Keandre Miller, Jalen Chatfield, dynamic third pair. And that's not me putting any in particular order on it, because the top pair is whoever's with Slavin, and the other 2 are basically 2 second pairs that are used situationally from there. This also gives you a true top pair where you're putting who's projected to be your other best defenseman with your already best defenseman. And then it makes it a little bit top heavy, but still evens out throughout the rest of the lineup. So cons, production is a wild card. It's hard to predict what production would look like because you're banking a whole lot on Keandre Miller and Alexander Nikishin being able to produce in those roles. You already know you're going to get that with Gostisbehere and Walker. So that's something that you just kind of have to wait and see how it works out. Power play shuffling. Nikishin will probably be on power play 2. Walker could potentially be on power play 2. Gostisbehere will be on power play 1. So at the conclusion of any power play, regardless of which unit you start or end with, temporarily you're going to have to throw a makeshift pair out there just so those guys can catch their breath and get to the next one. Overall assessment, this gives an unbalanced yet effective approach. Entirely dependent on Nikishin's development and if he can play on his offside at the NHL efficiently. That's going to be a big factor for this, and that's something that you can't determine right now. That's something you may not even be able to determine this season. So there's all that to consider. So that was the last of those configurations. So I'm going to take about a 10-minute break after I answer the rest of the comments. And then when I come back from the break, I'm going to talk a little bit about the episode of the Amazon Prime series with Seth Jarvis on it that I watched. I know that a lot of you guys beat me to it. Stuff like that normally doesn't interest me. I'll talk about that after the break. And I'll go into why. Then I'm going to talk about some players on an individual level, and then that'll pretty much be it. So I'm glad that I trimmed this up because it was going to be a lot longer initially. So you guys let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know which configuration that you think would be the best, things like that. I'm all ears. You let me know. I will be right back with you after. Well, we'll do the comments first. J-Dub says, no, it's China. Dylan says, I hope someone has a poster of the Bad Boys Chatty and Miller photo somewhere made a while back at opening night. Don't worry. Our friend Magneto Kane is, he'll handle that. He always does. When the Canes were in the playoffs last season, I asked him to do the Red Svets redemption poster, and I still have that. Like, I love that. It's so great. It's like my favorite thing ever. I just wish that series had gone a little bit better. J-Dub says, I don't want Boom on the third pairing, but figure Rob will do it anyway. I don't mind him doing it on the outset. I'm more concerned about who Nikishin's partner is going to be. Boom has got some work to do. So power skating wise, stride extension, speed, he's good there. His edges are a little clunky. So that's something that kind of has to, improve a little bit. And in addition to that, his gap control. So I'm going to take a break here. I will be back in about 10 minutes and we'll keep going. Alrighty, and we are back. So the next things I'm going to go over here, these are all just handwritten notes that I have, and I'm going to be talking about 3 players in particular: Sean Walker, Keandre Miller, and Alexander Nikishin. So the reason that I'm talking about these guys, the other 3 are basically, or the other 3 are more known quantities than these 3. Sean Walker's already been on the team for a season, but I think that there's a high potential he's going to take on an increased role, and I want to talk about why I think that he should get it. So, first things first here. Like I said before, Walker has an offensive upside that we haven't seen yet, and I knew that before he came to Carolina. So when Carolina was, when the sky was apparently falling and all the puck bunnies were like, oh my God, Brady Shea is gone, what are we going to do? And they essentially replaced one player with 2, which when you can do that, especially with the way the Hurricanes do business, I think that that's a much better way to go about it. So they signed Sean Walker and Shane Gostisbehere. And Walker's deal ended up being a little bit longer, being 5 years. And I think that that was a great decision because he's a dynamic player. You can move him up and down the lineup, and we're about to see him move up the lineup, in my opinion, coming up here. So the unseen offensive upside, where that comes from with Walker, from the video I was watching on him, even before he was signed by Carolina in last offseason, he likes to join the rush. He's good at getting to the slot. He's got a great shot, generating chances, and he's got a lot more playmaking ability than we've seen as well. So Walker would probably generate a ton of offense off the rush, and most of his points would come from primary assists and goals. If he's got Slavin on his left, he's going to do those things more often. Walker can afford, as long as he has Slavin, Walker can afford to play that high-risk, high-reward offensive game because of how good of a skater he is. He can get back really quick, and his edge work helps him get back into position very quickly. Other than Logan Stankoven, Sean Walker is the best skater on the team right now. Now, the best skater in the organization is Dominic Vinsori. But as far as mainstay full-time Canes players, Sean Walker is the best skating defenseman on the team, and overall, he is second only to Logan Stankoven. So this is where I go into the fact that he's more dynamic than Slavin's previous 3 defensive partners. Dougie Hamilton didn't have much of a two-way game. Definitely more offensively minded. He decent blocking shots, decent telegraphing and disrupting passes, all that type of stuff. But as far as being a complete defenseman, Dougie didn't really have that. Then you go to Tony DeAngelo, 4th forward in the purest form. That being said, and as I've said on many occasions, he was not nearly as bad defensively as certain people, within our fan base tried to say that he was, but that had nothing to do with hockey. We know what that was about. Pure 4th forward, still played passable defense with Slavin on his right, and at the time set a career high in points in a single season by a defenseman. Then you go to Brent Burns, his first season. Very good two-way game. Leaned more towards the offensive side. The offense tapered off over the next couple of years, and then particularly in the last season, he transformed into more of a pure shutdown guy to supplement Slavin in the defensive side of the game and didn't really produce from there. So those are other things to consider along with that. With Sean Walker, you have a player who can play the high-risk, high-reward offensive game, have the skating ability, the speed, and the edge work to get back into position very, very quickly, disrupt passes when he makes those risky plays if they don't go over well. And he has the ability to be the most dynamic partner that Slavin has had. The 3 guys I just mentioned before leaned heavily to the offensive side. Now, if you're talking about a defenseman who is nearly perfectly balanced on both sides of the puck that's currently on the Hurricanes, that is Sean Walker. So him being with someone like Jacob Slavin, you're probably talking about producing less. You're probably talking about him not scoring or that pair not producing as many goals as Jacob Slavin's previous 3 partners that I just mentioned did. But you will have much more airtight defense and much lower goals against. So overall, the net positive with that pair could be a lot bigger. And how much they score has a lot more to do with the 3 forwards in front of them, and the forward group has been improved. So that could also be a factor as well for them because it takes all 5 of the guys on the ice pulling the weight. But as far as Sean Walker's in particular role, if he's the guy playing with Slavin, you will have the most airtight defensive partner that Jacob Slavin has had while still producing a lot of offense, driving a lot of possession, producing a lot of high quality chances, all that type of stuff. So I'm very excited to see Sean Walker take on an increased role, because at times when we saw him playing with Slavin limitedly in the regular season and then extensively in the playoffs, you remember how valuable Sean Walker was, and especially in that sequence at the end that ultimately eliminated the Caps. So seeing him play with Slavin will finally give Slavin not a purely offensively minded partner, but someone who's 50-50. If you want a sample size of what that could look like, and I'm not trying to say that Sean Walker is nearly as good of a defenseman as Brock Faber is, he's not. But if you're talking about the way that they execute, the way that they play the game, Sean Walker and Brock Faber have a lot of similarities. So think of Sean Walker as Brock Faber light. Think of a version of that pair that's not in a best-on-best tournament, but in a standard, regular NHL setting. That is what Slavin and Walker have the potential to be like, and I'm really excited about the idea of Sean Walker playing with Jacob Slavin based on that. Now, next, we're going to talk about Keandre Miller. He's got his work cut out for him. A lot of the criticism of him was a little bit over the top. Not so much by Canes fans. They seem to have really welcomed him with open arms, and I'm glad that they did, because the kid's a good player. He's a very good player. If you remember the last time the Hurricanes played in the playoffs, he didn't make a ton of noise, but man, he was annoying to play against. When he's playing well, he is very hard to play against. So first things first, when it comes to Keandre Miller, he has to improve his gap control. He's already got part of what he needs to do that. One, he's got the skating ability. He can skate. Big kid, but he can skate. He's got the size. He's got the frame. He's got the reach. That is all good stuff right there to have working in your favor towards improving your gap control. And on top of that, he's got better coaches on the defensive side of the puck than he had before, because he's got Brind'Amour, he's got Gleason, Slavin can show him some stuff. Chatfield will probably play with him. He can show him some stuff. He's got a great group around him to help him transform his game. And he doesn't have to transform a lot of it. If he improves his gap control, he will be an impact player on this team. Now, that is much easier said than done. Gap control, and I mean, I know I'm just a mid to upper level beer league player, but gap control is one of the most difficult things in the game to learn. And in a way, you kind of have to teach yourself. People can give you pointers, but it's just as much mental as it is physical, being able to anticipate movements, not overstepping someone, not crossing over when you should do a C cut, making sure that you're not too close, that you're not too far, that you have that good 1.5, 2 stick length gap. So that way you can react, force them wide, or take away open ice in the middle, whatever it is you need to do in that point. That's just something you kind of got to learn, because you got to read and react. You got to know when to step up, when it's too risky to do so, when it's less risky to do so. It's a hard thing to learn. But Keandre Miller has the tools already that he needs. He has the best coaches around him and to teach him those things. And then additionally, on top of that, Key has also said that he's tried to model his game after Jacob Slavin. Now Jacob Slavin and him are on the same team. So now he can hear it straight from Jacob Slavin, the things that he can do to improve his game. If Keandre Miller becomes half of the shutdown guy that Jacob Slavin is, then he's going to be in good shape. I got a lot of faith in the kid. I know that when they made the initial trade, when we were doing the live stream on free agency day, I was surprised by it. I wasn't mad about it. I was just kind of like, why? And I thought that Ghost was going to be the return, so that way that everything could stay balanced out. But then they said they were sending Scott Morrow away. And if I weighed what I weigh now, I might have attempted a backflip, because I was so happy that Scott Morrow was gone. I cannot stand Scott Morrow. Like, as a player, I don't know anything about him as a person, and I don't really care. But all I'm saying is the Canes got an upgrade. They traded out someone who might not even end up being more than the 5th guy on a mediocre team to get someone who can be an impact player. So that was a good decision. So next thing, play more confidently, less hesitancy. So some of the trouble that Key had when he was in New York, there were times where he'd be below the goal line and he'd get pushed off the puck because he kind of hesitated with either trying to make a pass, wrapping it around the boards, trying to maintain possession of it, eat that puck, whatever he had to do in those situations. Those are all things that he can learn from all of the aforementioned people, i.e. Brind'Amour, Gleason, Slavin, Chatfield. Those are things that they can help him work on. He'll get that figured out, and then he'll be good to go. Kid's got a cannon of a shot. I think his average shot velocity, was 89, 90 miles an hour, something like that, or his top velocity, I should say. Hurricanes are a high-volume shooting team. They take quantity chances over quality chances. Keandre Miller will get his chances to shoot the puck. And on a team that loves to have shots from the point, Keandre Miller is someone who can benefit from that greatly. Don't hesitate, shoot the puck, get it through traffic, and he's going to contribute greatly in that way. Use your frame, be physical. Like I said, I don't know where these Rangers fans are getting the idea that Keandre Miller isn't physical. He's already recorded 652 hits. I was surprised to see that stat as well. And if anybody's exaggerating it, hits are a arena staff tracked stat. So if anybody's been exaggerating it, it's been mostly the Rangers staff, 41 games out of the season and however many in the playoffs. So if he unlocks that physical side, takes it to another level, which he can do, then again, impact player. I have a lot of faith that Keandre Miller is going to turn out really well for the Canes. Like I said, initially I was surprised by that trade, but the more and more I looked at it, the more and more I liked it. He has a lot less to work on, or he has less to work on than what a lot of people give him credit for. He's just got a couple of difficult things, primarily the gap control. He's got to get that down, and then everything else is going to be great. Now, one thing I want to talk about how he works in concert with Jalen Chatfield. When the Canes traded for Brady Shea, they wanted to bring in a physical defenseman with a good shot and who could skate pretty well. Keandre Miller is a big defenseman who can be physical with a big shot who skates pretty well. People forget Brady Shea took a while to adapt, and defensemen, it typically does take longer. But for about the first 25, 30 games that Brady Shea was a Hurricane, I was like, I don't know about this. But over the course of time, he adapted, and him and Brett Pesce found chemistry, and everything worked out fine. That's what you're looking at with Keandre Miller. You're looking at having that dynamic where Chatfield is kind of like Pesce. They play similar games in a lot of ways, except Chatfield's very aggressive with his gaps. You have that shutdown guy who will allow Keandre Miller to open up his offensive game, jump in on the rush more, shoot the puck more, use his frame. He's got really good puck protection as well. We actually saw that again when he used it against the Hurricanes on a couple of occasions. So you can create that dynamic where they kind of split the defensive duties 60-40, Chatfield being the 60, Keandre Miller being the 40, and Keandre being the play driver, the puck possession driver, and the guy who shoots the puck more on that pair. So you could see the second coming of Shea Pesce with Chatfield and Miller. And I think that that's going to be great. I really do. Now, lastly, Alexander Nikishin. Biggest things that I want to highlight with this. I'm as excited as anybody about Boom being here. Be patient with him. He has been playing overseas in the KHL where it used to be all the rinks were on the international ice, the 200 by 100. Now, some of them, including the SCA arena, the new one and the previous one, were playing on 200 by 85. Some of the rinks in the KHL have the Finnish style hybrid icing, which is, I believe, 200 by 90. So he's been playing on 3 different sized ice surfaces over the course of the last few seasons in a league that's good, but not as good as the NHL, where he was a much more dominant presence. A lot of the big hits you saw him lay in the KHL, he's not going to do that as much in the NHL because the level of play is too fast and the average player is too good for him to lay as many hits here as he did there. It's a lot harder to hit guys in the NHL because on average, they're faster, they're better skaters, and they're more skilled. You'll still see the big hits out of him. We saw him do it to, Duke on the Tampa Bay Lightning. And anytime something bad happens to somebody named Duke, I'm okay with it because I'm a UNC fan, unfortunately, which kind of sucks because I'm not a big basketball fan and their football team, as we saw today, really sucks. So all that considered, out of the gate, Nikishin is going to need some time. Now, learn the language and the system. Apparently, the language barrier was a bigger problem than a lot of us realized, myself included, based on things that have come out during the preseason. The language barrier was a little bit more of a problem than we thought, which is probably why Scott Morrow went back in for a second game over Alexander Nikishin. Now that it's come to light that that was that big of a problem, I understand Rod's decision-making there a little bit more. I don't agree with it. But, he's forgotten more about hockey than I'll ever know. But the thing about it is, if you can't communicate, even though there's not a whole lot of words that you have to know to play hockey, pretty sure we know which one Kochekov learned first. That is something that has to get sorted out because it's not only about the communication on the ice, it's about people being able to tell them what happened back on the bench. And it's going to get annoying for Rod and Gleason in particular to have to constantly go tell Svechnikov or tell Kochekov what to say to him to translate what they're saying. And things do get lost in translation, even with guys who speak English pretty well, like Svechnikov and Kochekov do, especially Svechnikov. So there's also that to consider. So learn the language, learn the system. Those things go hand in hand. Now, the other thing is Nikishin does need to change some things about his game, but he doesn't need to transform his entire game. You still want that physicality. You still want that heavy shot. You still want that dynamic offensive game that he can use. You still want that really good speed and that really good power skating. You still want those things. That being said, edge work and gap control has to improve. This is one difference between him and Keandre Miller. Keandre Miller is already a good skater. Alexander Nikishin is a good power skater. His north and south speed, his straightaway speed, good. His ability to pivot, good. Actual crossovers, edge work, and C cuts going backwards could use some work. You fix those things, and eventually the gap control will start to sort itself out to some degree or another. So that's one thing that Keandre Miller and Alexander Nikishin have in common. They need to work on the gap control. Nikishin's got further to go in that regard than Keandre Miller. Plus, Nikishin is adjusting to the pace of play at the NHL level and always playing on 200 by 85 rinks. Now, the other thing is Keandre Miller's role is going to definitively be, I think, second pair and power play 2 over the course of his time as a Hurricane, which is supposedly going to be the next 8 seasons. Alexander Nikishin, who will probably be here for as long, if not longer, it's a small role now. It's a big role later. So you have to project out for that for Nikishin. You have to look at the big picture with him and expect him to be able to develop into taking on an increased role later. So that's going to play a factor in what they focus on with his development as opposed to someone like Keandre Miller. So doesn't need to reinvent his game. Definitely needs to change some things about it, particularly skating and the gap control and knowing that you can't always step up for those big hits. Do it as much as you can. But if you do it too often, guys will get wise to it. They'll start burning you. And we don't need that to be happening, even if he's with Slavin, because Slavin is not 100% fail-safe. Nobody is. 99% of the time, he'll cover for anybody's mistakes. But every once in a while, one's going to get through, and every one is one too many. So Nikishin needs to transform his game a little bit, but don't totally change everything about it. There's a lot more good than bad. So that's the biggest thing with him. So that is everything in regards to those 3 particular defensemen. Overall assessment of the entire situation. As I stated before, you have a lot of known quantities. You have a few unknown quantities. You've got some things you got to figure out, but you have all the right pieces. It's just going to take some time to figure out how they gel. Through the first 20 games or so, Keandre Miller is going to be probably figuring some stuff out. Alexander Nikishin will probably take him a little bit longer. And then not to mention, you have guys who have already been here, of which all 3 of them could potentially have new partners. Chatfield, Walker, Gostisbehere, and Slavin. Any combination of those guys are going to be playing with players that they haven't played with full-time before, potentially, to some degree or another. So those are things that you have to figure out. And once those are figured out, the team is going to be fine. But the biggest thing is, if it doesn't work well on day 1, if you see the defensive pair shuffled up, do not panic. Be patient. It will get figured out. I'm not worried about the Canes not making the playoffs. That shouldn't be a problem. Now, they need to have a decent amount of points stacked up. They need to make some hay between now and March because, as I talked about in the schedule breakdown, the last couple of months of the season, or you could even say even like right after the Olympic break, is going to be pretty rough on this team. A lot of road games, a lot of back-to-backs. And I've already got, I think, 14 back-to-backs as it is. I don't remember exactly what was on the schedule stream. I can pull it up and look because I think I've still got it in here. But having some hay made by then, walking into March with 76 to 80 points would be the best thing you could do for yourself. Probably more than that, honestly. I'll say 86. Because you want to try and finish the season with 100, 102, which is about where I think the Canes will land, somewhere between 102 and 105. But the vast majority of those really need to come before all those big road trips at the end. You don't want to be fighting for a playoff spot in the last week when you're playing against a bunch of, playing a bunch of trap games against the Blackhawks and the Islanders and stuff like that. And the Islanders could surprise some people. I don't think that they will, but the potential for them to sneak into a wild card spot if they play well enough and, the stars kind of align for them and things go wrong for other teams in the Metropolitan Division, that absolutely could happen. So keeping all that in mind, be patient. So we'll do some more comments here, and then I'm going to do a couple of, then I'm going to talk about the Seth Jarvis episode on Amazon. NJ Leak reposted the stream. Thanks, buddy. I hope you're doing well tonight. Can't wait for NASCAR 25. That's going to be fun. I don't think we'll get to play together because you're going to be on Xbox. I'm going to be on PC, but we'll do some qualifying time trial challenges or something. We're going to have fun. We're going to play some way or another. Blessed Deliver says Scott Morrow sucks. I agree. Dylan Bollinger says Boom did put someone on their ass today. It wasn't big hit. Dude still went to the ground. It doesn't take much from him, man. It doesn't. The kid is a tank. It does not take much body contact to make it happen. Joachim Kimmel didn't feel comfortable repeating what Sebastian Aho said to him in finish after his big hit on Svechnikov. That's one of the reasons why I say that, and I didn't watch the game today. I'm going to get into that in a little bit. That's one of the reasons why it's like, I think Aho needs to be the captain when Jordo's done, because he's got that extra little bit of fire. Slavin is a very calm, reserved guy. You need someone who will go in the locker room and, drop some F-bombs and cuss at them when they're not playing well and tell them to get it together. And then not to mention the guy who's more likely to go out and make a game-breaking play. Slavin is the most consistent guy on the team. As far as someone who will go out there and be like, you know what, fine, I'll do it myself. That's Aho. Slavin needs to have a letter from now until the day he hangs it up. But as far as who wears the C next, that's Aho. I know that there's some concern about it because people look back on the Eric Stahl days and think maybe that's not the best idea. Eric Stahl didn't have a very good team around him. So that's something that I am totally adamant about. Aho needs to be the next captain of the team. If Jordo decides to, give the C away early, it needs to go directly to Aho. And they've been grooming Aho for it because they put his locker stall next to Justin Williams. Aho will be the captain of the team. I guarantee it. I would bet more on Aho being the next captain of the team than I would have on Nikolai Ehlers being a Hurricane. And I called that years ago. Raleigh 98 says, I think we've learned that it's not a good idea to peak early, so I don't mind a slower start for the team. Agreed. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I talked about a little bit with Stankoven at center. If he was overperforming now, I'd be worried because then when it comes time for him to learn the hard lessons, he's learning them in the regular season when points are on the line. And I'm not entirely sure he's going to stick there. That's a conversation for another day. But yeah, don't want the team to peak too early. I'd rather them be playing well and go in at wild card 1 than win the division and then go get killed in the ECF again by the Panthers without Barkov possibly and without Tkachuk possibly, even though Tkachuk's on the timetable to return by then. Barkov, ACL and MCL, if he tries to come back at the time he's saying he's going to come back, I like Sasha Barkov. He's one of my top 5 favorite non-Hurricanes among active players. I do not want to see him come back too early and get hurt. I really don't. Because if he comes back too early and tears it bad enough, that could end his career. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that happen to anybody. I hate Tom Wilson. I hate Brad Marchand. I don't want to see that happen to any of them. Primarily because karma's a bitch and it will come back on, one of the Canes players, and I don't want that. Evan Smith says, sorry if I already talked about it, but how does Nikishin look in the preseason? He's got some stuff to work on. Edge work, a little clunky. Physicality's there, but he's got to learn when to use it and when not to. Gets a little bit lost in the defensive zone. Zone exits are a little bit rough. Overall, though, I think it's fine. It's not a ton of progress from what we saw of him last season, but last season was a pretty small sample size. This one, I'm looking for him to take some big steps. But in the preseason, he's looked all right. Not as good as I would like for him to, but give it time. I think it will get worked out. He also asked, what do you think about Giovanni Smith? Good depth signing. I'm glad it's a two-way deal. Giovanni Smith is one of those guys that you don't want to put in the big club because he's just not a mainstay NHL player, not on a competitive team. If he was on, back on San Jose or something like that, he could be. But as far as his fit with the Hurricanes, having that grinder, physical type of guy who will fight, you need to have a guy like that in reserve so he can go play with the Wolves, get some reps, and then you can call him up if you need him. And I think the biggest difference between him and Nadeau getting called up is going to be if it depends on who comes out of the lineup. For example, if Carrier, Martinook, Stahl, someone like that gets hurt, that's when you call up Giovanni Smith. If someone like Jarvis Svechnikov, Aho, Stankoven, someone like them gets hurt and has to come out for a few games, that's when you call up someone like Nadeau. You don't bring Nadeau up unless he's in the top 6. And when the Hurricanes finalize their roster cuts and everything for the season, Nadeau is someone I'm going to talk about at length why he was sent down. Overall, I understand the rationale of the decision. If there was somewhere to put him, he would have been called up, kind of like Jackson Blake last year. Jackson Blake was taking advantage of an opportunity and a need. So I saw that little interaction in the chat there. So Jackson Blake, there was a clear path for him to the NHL because the team wasn't as deep because of how the roster was looking when camp started last season. Jackson Blake making the team, the door was wide open for him, and he walked through it definitively. He made the strides that he needed to make in his development to be able for them to say, you're in. Nadeau also made a lot of those same steps, but there's a couple other things that he could work on. Primarily, he needs to put on some muscle. He's getting pushed off the puck a little bit too easy. Defensive side of his game, it's better, but it can use some improvement. So him marinating a little bit longer in the minors is not the worst thing. And there's not really a really big need for it right now. And I saw someone say something stupid earlier that Giovanni Smith should be in over Eric Robinson. I'm like, the hell are you talking about? I'll never understand why Eric Robinson gets hate. I mean, this is coming from someone who thought he wasn't even going to make the team last season. I was like, oh, he'll be a good depth piece to call up. That's what I thought Eric Robinson was going to be, and now he's a mainstay bottom six player for the Hurricanes. He's been great. That contract that he's on is great. So, Smokey says, Coach Chekhov dropped a stick at least 5 times today. Oh my God. I would love to ask you if you were messing with me, but I know that that's I know that that's probably what happened. 1 second. Sorry, my dog was being a little bit of a lunatic again. Dylan also says, Cucci gave up 5-on-3 and an OT power play goal. People need to chill. Yeah, like I said, I didn't watch the game. Smokey says you need to chill. I'm too chill. Penguin blue waving tear. I guess those are supposed to be emojis. Okay. But yeah. All right. So last thing I'm going to talk about before I call it a night here, because I got an exam I got to do tomorrow, and I might torture myself with watching the Panthers game. I'm probably not going to, though, because God, they're bad. But so a bunch of people had told me about the Face Off Inside the NHL series on Amazon. I've watched it a little bit in the past. There was one weekend I was there last year with AB, and my friend Jeremy came there. It was a whole lot of fun. And you know, there was a point in time where we were sitting down watching that series, and it's all right. I'm not really interested in the whole behind the scenes, get to know the player stuff. Like you guys know me. I'm more likely to tell you, what skates a player is wearing than anything else about their life. It just doesn't interest me. I think that's part of the reason I don't understand this weirdo parasocial hypersexual shit that a lot of people get into about the players. It's a weird dynamic to me. Like I said, when people were like, oh, I'm so excited about Aho's wedding. I'm like, you weren't invited. Shut up. So it's like, I personally don't understand that. That being said, interesting enough, I'll watch it. So today I wanted to watch the game, but I was getting home at 4 and my window to eat is between 4 and 6. That's what I do pretty much every day, barring circumstances that would require me to eat earlier or later. So today, what I was going to try and do, I tried to pull the game up on my phone on the website, on the browser, and AirPlay it to the TV. The one up here in my man cave worked fine. When I went downstairs to eat, because I can't eat in here because of that thing over there won't leave me alone, and he'll try to jump up and take my burger from me, and that's unacceptable. I was AirPlaying it in here for part of the first period. I went downstairs, tried to AirPlay it there, and then when I did it, it kept wanting to take it back to the beginning when they were doing the radio broadcast during warmups. So I just didn't bother with that. So I decided I'll just watch something else. So I watched a little bit of college ball. I believe I watched Texas and who was it? Texas and Florida, I think. I wasn't really paying attention to it. I just had something on in the background. And then after a while, I flipped over to Amazon Prime and I watched the episode that had Seth Jarvis in it. Here's something I don't understand about it. So I thought it was good. It was all right to watch. It's not something that I'm gonna like really ever want to watch again. What I don't understand is how people's biggest takeaway from that episode, like the way that I saw a lot of people talking about it online, they were talking this stuff about, oh, Seth Jarvis is so whimsical and fun. He's just like me. Well, one, no, he's not. Like, I don't see how you watch something like that and that's your biggest takeaway from it. I don't understand that. I saw someone who has a ton of drive to win, and he will do it if it kills him. He wants to bring a Stanley Cup to Raleigh if he dies trying. Yeah, that showed some of his whimsical, fun personality, but it also showed this dynamic of like how he's really hard on himself. And I don't think he understands how skilled of a player that he actually is. and that sometimes he struggles with some confidence and mental health issues and stuff like that. That's stuff that, was discussed in the episode by him. But a lot of people were like taking that away from it, that, oh, he's whimsical and fun. That there wasn't much whimsical and fun about that. What I saw is a guy who has an inherent desire to win. And it's number one on his list of priorities in life. And there's not many people walking around on this planet who actually legitimately have that mentality nowadays, where everything else is secondary to achieving greatness. Wasn't hockey related, but I know what it's like to want something so bad you'd pretty much die to get it. And then if you don't get it the rest of your life, you're wondering, why didn't I? So when I was seeing people, finding a ton of humor in that, even though there were some funny moments, that's not what I took away from it. I don't want to say it was somber, but I definitely would say I saw a side of Seth Jarvis where he wears his heart on his sleeve. He really does. And I didn't take away a lot of fun from that. I took away a guy who's bound and determined to win, and that's all he cares about. I didn't see a whimsical and fun player who is always happy with everything. It's good to have a guy that has that type of personality to help keep the locker room light. That's one of the biggest things Seth Jarvis brings to the table off the ice is, the laughter he brings. And, like I've seen interviews with the guy, like when they asked him about ever being a GM and he was like, fuck no. Like, the kid's hilarious. But do not let that outward personality fool you. He's as serious as they come about winning. He can laugh and joke about things all day, but he cares about winning more than anything. That was my biggest takeaway from that. And he's in a constant battle with himself to try and make sure that he is as big of an impact player for the Hurricanes as he can be. That being said, I think Jarvis is the most skilled forward on the team. Not the most complete one. That's Aho. But as far as a very, very skilled player who might end up being the best person on the team, even though I think Stankoven maybe has a marginal chance of being a slightly better player than him overall, that's Jarvis. By far. He just wants to win. So I don't really get into like the things that a lot of people do about the players' personal lives. I don't care. And there's a lot of people who have this, they create this image of these guys that they don't know in their head. And then when they find out that they're not the great human beings that they think they are, their worldview is completely shattered because of it. They don't just get off the ice and transform and turn into cute little puppies. That's what kind of annoys me about some of the crowd. It seems, like I said, hockey and F1 seems to have an abundance of those types of fans. And I do not understand why. Not saying that it's wrong to see what a player's up to on Instagram. It's not wrong to watch these TV shows and kind of get an inside look at what their life is like away from the rink. That's totally fine. But I just don't see how anybody gets a takeaway of Seth Jarvis is whimsical and fun and just like me. No, he's not. Seth Jarvis is a winner. And I respect him for that mentality he has. Dylan says, I'll be watching the Bills game. Yeah, y'all might win. Don't do it, bro. The Panthers suck. Tepper needs to clean house. No, Tepper needs to leave the house. Should have never let somebody from Pittsburgh buy a team in Carolina anyway. I would love the behind the scenes at the game, et cetera, just not following one person around. Yeah, like I said, something like that's cool for some people. It just doesn't interest me. I'm more interested in what goes on the ice personally. I just don't really care about like what the players do in their free time. I never have. It's just not anything that interests me. It's like if I found out another one of them was like big into sim racing or flight sims, like I am, cool. Victor Hedman's actually a really big aviation enthusiast, because there was a video, I think, of him at Tyndall Air Force Base, and he was in the F-15 simulator. I think it was. That was years ago. I could be wrong about that, but I do remember something along those lines. There was one time where I want to say it was Justin Abdelkader flew with the Blue Angels. That was pretty cool. Stuff like that is fine, but other stuff I just don't really care for it. That's just not my thing. What I mean is like Hard Knocks, but for NHL would be cool. Yeah, something like that would be fine. It's not anything I personally would pay a lot of attention to because, like, it just doesn't interest me. But yeah, it was a good episode. It was a cool thing to see and everything like that. I like seeing that human side of Jarvis, but it's just not something I care a ton about. Lesson Deliver says facts. Cavery says apparently Aho said something to the guy who hits fetch and finish, and he wasn't comfortable saying it to the media. That's my captain. One day. That's captaincy material. I mean, it's just like Sebastian Aho shouldn't be the one who's going up shaking the mitts at people and ready to fight people. Like, if you don't have somebody else to do that, I mean, but I'm glad he's sticking up for guys because, if Aho had to throw, he could do it. I just don't want him risking breaking his hand or getting knocked out or ending up in the box for 5 minutes. Any of those things are not good conditions. So it's all that factored in. It's like I'd rather him not do things like that, but there's sometimes where no matter who you are and no matter what your role on the team is, you have to do it. Bless and Deliver says, please buy the Carolina Panthers Tom Dundon. Well, if you want to buy the Florida Panthers and fire them off to China, I'm fine with that. Dylan says, Tom already has a hockey and a basketball team now. I guess we like the Trailblazers now. I don't. I'll be damned before I like a team in Portland, Oregon. Hell, I don't even – well, I mean, if I had to pick an NBA team, it's the Hornets. But I'm not a big basketball guy. When I do watch basketball, I like watching college basketball, which is basically when the Heels are playing in March Madness. That's about it. And even then, hockey season's in full swing, so I'm not really paying attention to that. Caver says Aho's going to be a menace this year. Yeah, he's been a menace every year. And now he's got a good team around him. So, LOL, straight to China. Yeah, straight to China. But, all right, boys, that is going to be it for me tonight. I will probably clip some stuff from this and show it on an individual basis. Don't know when the next stream is going to be, except for the one on Tuesday with my friend Devil's Joint. We're going to do our 48 hours till the season starts, since he's a Devils fan. He's a really good friend of mine. And we're going to have a fun conversation there. And we're also going to talk about like our dogs and some other serious stuff. But thank you guys very much for joining me. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. I will see you guys soon. And thankfully, the abomination known as preseason is over. And next season, we're looking at the NHL the NHL regular season starting around the 29th of September. I'm very happy about that. Night, sir, Dylan. Night to you. Hope you're doing better. Everything. Evan Smith. Have a good night, everyone. You too, pal. Nope, I'll see you guys soon.